And we have had engine cutoff! We have had engine cutoff! Premature engine cutoff! The Kerbal X is on a parabolic trajectory. And Patlas Kerman has cut the engines. That's correct. Patlas Kerman, commander of the mission, and pilot in fact, has cut the engines in order to correct for the oscillations, and he is now restarting them. There we go. The engines are back up and running again, and the Wizard X continues its voyage into orbit. With the oscillations now more or less under control, the rocket engine burning powerfully now, accelerating the cargo of the Wizard Star 1 research and development platform into orbit. Of course, orbit will only be achieved if Patlas Kerman is able to take the rocket to orbital velocities and indeed beyond the atmospheric boundary of 70 kilometers. Patlas Kerman, of course, is well aware of this as the only experienced and qualified member of the Kerbinauts Corps for the Duna 1 and a bit space program, a private space program run by some of the planet Kerbin's most highly qualified and handsome TV executives and producers who have set themselves the goal of extending Kerbal kind to the planet Duna and establishing there a permanent colony, a goal which will be funded in large part by the TV revenues generated by coverage of the mission and its various stages in the reality TV show Duna 1 and a bit. Oh yes, and those same TV producers and executives are thrilled with this launch, for not only does it now look like it is indeed going to be successful, but it was packed with drama and, most importantly, peril, and all TV executives know peril is vital. Now we're in orbit, of course it is safe to deploy the launch shroud, to jettison the launch shell that protected the Wizard Star 1 from aerodynamic forces during the launch process, and to extend the solar panels. And there's plenty of fuel left in this main rocket booster section as well, so we're going to fire that up one more time to get us towards orbital velocity, but we're going to jettison it just shy of actual orbital velocity so that it falls safely back to Kerbin, and we will use the onboard fuel reserves of the Wizard Star 1 to complete the orbital insertion. Alright, they're going to go for separation now. I'm hearing they are going to separate the main vehicle. There we go. And we have engine ignition. And the Wizard Star 1 research station is under its own power, and it has achieved orbital insertion. And the TV executives and producers have gone wild. A near perfect circular orbit there with an apoapse and periapse of between 90 and 94 kilometers. Lovely insertion into orbit. Patlas Kerman is thrilled with the ascent, as are his crewmates, Juggly Kerman, Gemby Kerman, and Lena Kerman. All rather happy that the ascent has finished. That oscillation obviously would have been kind of concerning, at least for Patlas Kerman, who has the brains to realize just how close the mission came to catastrophic failure. The rest of the crewmates are just happy because they get to open the snacks now. And Patlas Kerman has gone EVA in order to inspect the Wizard Star 1 for any damage caused by that launch oscillation and the various stresses that were incurred. Speculation is that because no struts were put in place between the escape capsules and the main body of the spacecraft, that they would have created some oscillation forces. However, Patlas Kerman, using his helmet light now to observe the spacecraft, everything seems to be intact and looking good. Little bursts there from his reaction control jets. Day 1 aboard the Wizard Star Research and Development Station. The Kerbmates are in the habitation module. Patlas Kerman has successfully navigated the ship to orbit and performed an EVA survey of the station for Big Duna, thus earning himself bonus snacks. The other Kerbmates are now offered the opportunity to also earn extra snacks by performing an orbital survey of the planet Kerbin. Now, let's transfer somebody up to the control room, because apparently nothing works. Nobody has connected any controls whatsoever in the hitchhiker's living quarters there. Only the control room has controls for things. We're going to send one of the girls. Which one? Well, probably the scientist, but frankly, I have no idea which one that is or was. We'll take Lena. Lena Kerbin is going to transfer up. In fact, she's going to take a spacewalk. Should we do a spacewalk? No, she'll just transfer nice and safely. There we go. She's gone through the things, and she is deploying the scanner. Scanner, of course, nicely organized, nicely oriented to scan the surface of Kerbin from an equatorial orbit. Let us perform an orbital survey scan. Lena Kerbin, puzzling now. She's reading an error message coming up on the scanner screen. It seems to say you must be in a stable polar orbit between 60 and 100 and 1,500 kilometers to perform an orbital survey. Of course, the Wizard Star is not in a polar orbit, it's in an equatorial orbit, and therefore a survey appears to be quite impossible at this point in time. And so the TV executives and producers down on the ground are having a bit of a confab and trying to decide just what they're going to do about this situation, as few enough of them have any idea what they're doing, even when talking about basic orbital maneuvers. One of them has suggested that maybe he will indeed do a night course in orbital mechanics, a correspondence course, in order to better determine if it's possible to transition the Wizard Star into a polar orbit or not. In the meantime, the rest of them are getting ready for the inevitable post-launch cocktail parties that they must attend, and all of that good stuff. So the Wizard Star 1 will be left in its present orbit, and the orbital survey scan will be abandoned for now. The TV show is a roaring success. Kerbals everywhere are having a great time watching the activities of Patlas, Lena, and the other two in orbit as they perform a variety of duties, eat snacks, fail to scan Kerbin or do anything else of any real use, but they can monkey about in zero gravity quite a bit, and also do a few on-orbit maneuvers. They get to get out and do some spacewalking around, check on stuff, you know, general bits and pieces like that. Compete in a few challenges, for example, zero-G sports activities and such. Well, that was quite a bender. The TV executives have gotten back to the Space Center for the first time, actually, since they launched the craft. They have, of course, been directing things from the TV control room from time to time, but mostly they've just been out at parties, getting drunk, and having a fantastic time, leaving the old Kerbals in orbit to continue to stew in their own juices, which is precisely what is happening. Let us go and check on them. Actually, we are 7 days out from the next launch window, and a flurry of activity is starting up here at the Kerbal Space Program once again, at the Duna 1 and a bit headquarters, as they try and figure out what it is they're actually going to do for their next launch. Let's check on the Kerbals in orbit, though. There they are, Lena, Juggly, Gemby, and of course Patlas, all still in orbit. I never actually experimented with these other things. Shall we give those a try whilst we're here? Look, there we go. Lena Kerbin has said, oh, by the way, there are these other controls. I don't know what they are because, quite honestly, I didn't receive any training whatsoever for this mission, but nonetheless, it looks like it could be interesting. Let us experiment with it. It's like a camera or a telescope of some sort. Toggle scanner GUI. There is no orbital survey data available. Conduct an orbital survey using a survey scanner to enable high definition. Right. Okay. Well, I guess that isn't going to work without having completed the survey scan. What about this? The narrow band scanner. Scanner GUI. No data. Exactly the same. Are they just the same thing with a different model? Who knows? Could be. One of them is probably added by a mod. Right, okay, well in that case it doesn't really matter that we didn't use these beforehand, because actually they don't do anything, at least not without performing an orbital survey scan. Meanwhile, back at the Duna 1 and a bit headquarters, the TV executives are pulling themselves together after their bender and trying to figure out what to do next. The executive responsible for doing the correspondence course on orbital mechanics has reported back that although he didn't complete all of the coursework, he is fairly certain that transitioning the Wizard Star into a polar orbit would be tricky, and therefore he recommends a new mission to launch a dedicated spacecraft for performing the orbital survey scan. Now naturally this will be a robotic spacecraft, and in order to test the heavy launch vehicle properly, it'll be nice and weighty. So the rest of the executives fueled by ideas generated during their Bender month, have come up with this modified design for the launch vehicle. And basically it involves the principle, or it is based on the principle that more engines and rockets must be a good thing. And so they have doubled up the solid rocket boosters and added these extra liquid-fueled rockets with a whole bunch of fuel piping in an effort to prevent the main fuel tanks running out on the first stage liquid boosters before the solids did, and generally giving the whole thing a little bit more thrust. Of course, once again, absolutely no calculation has been done, and in fact, nobody really has any idea if this is going to work. The design was found on a napkin after a particularly heavy night out, and no one quite remembers the theory that went into it. Fortunately, the engineers have managed to cobble it together into what is hoped will be a working design. As for the payload, the accountants responsible have informed the TV producers and executives that at this time they cannot afford more Kerbinauts because of the amount of money that has been spent on cocktail parties, and so an unmanned mission was required. And rather than simply launching a polar orbiting scanner, which was deemed to be too simple and not exciting enough by the TV producers, who of course are more interested in improving the ratings than simply flying a nice basic mission. Although the one engineer they do have on the payroll now also agreed that in order to properly test the heavy launch vehicle they would need a subsizable weight on the top, and so this multi-purpose vehicle was created, which is capable of first visiting the Wizard Star outpost and therefore generating some excitement as it delivers various secret supplies in its containers there. And then it has these 4 nuclear rocket engines and a huge fuel reserve, which should enable it to transition into a polar orbit and successfully complete the orbital survey scan, which will allow the Kerbals aboard the Wizard Star to actually do their detailed scanning with the various pieces of equipment that are on board. That, at least, is the hope, although of course it is a hope based on very little actual understanding, knowledge, or experience. And welcome to another super exciting launch day here at the Kerbal Space Center as the Duna 1 and a bit space program prepares for its second launch to Kerbin orbit. This time an unmanned vehicle which will be visiting the Wizard Star research outpost to deliver essential supplies before continuing on to a polar orbit to perform a survey scan. The Wizard Star just approaching the horizon now in the perfect rendezvous position. At least that is what the TV executive who engaged in the correspondence course thinks he was told by someone on the bus. And we're entering the final launch countdown now. Engines are throttled up to full in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have main engine start. Something has gone horribly wrong with the staging. We're firing the main engines and separating from the rocket. We're not entirely sure what happened. The TV executives gave the order to go anyway, and so go we have. Now there is an early separation of some solid rocket boosters, and the Kerbal Space Center has insisted that the rocket begin its pitch-over maneuver immediately, which as it turns out is actually very sensible. Anyway, so it has begun its pitch-over maneuver. Look at it accelerating away relatively slowly from the launch pad. This is a lumbering beast, and we have separation of those first liquid fuel boosters. Lots of lovely explosions. That's what we like to see, accelerating past 200 meters per second now, as the Wizard X continues to roar on towards orbit on this unmanned mission to visit the Wizard Star 1. Its payload full of undisclosed supplies for the Kerbals, who we have come to know and love. The solid rocket boosters now have nearly consumed all of their fuel. They will be being jettisoned soon. The velocity vector and the thrust vector of the vehicle are looking quite far apart from each other. This is perhaps a concern for the TV executives if they had any idea what was actually going on, which somehow I doubt, as they have already begun drinking cocktails. Solid rocket booster separation coming up now in 2, 1, 0. There they go, firing their Separatrons to pull them away from the main rocket. and prevent any possible chance of collision. Although it looked like... Oh, and there go the liquid-fueled boosters as well. The first set of large liquid-fueled boosters, which have separated cleanly away, and the second set now fully fueled and roaring away, carrying the Wizard X and the WizScan Ultra P off into orbit. Everything looking nominal now as we come up for separation of the second set of liquid-fueled boosters. There they go, carried safely away by the Separatrons once again, and the Wizard X carrying the WizScan Ultra P has reached the boundary of space, still on a suborbital trajectory at this time, but maneuvers are being planned right now to take it into orbit and on a rendezvous course with the WizStar 1. The order's been given to separate the shroud, which has exploded away from the main spacecraft, revealing for the first time the WizScan Ultra P. Have the solar panels unfurling successfully, and there she is, revealed in all of her glory, the WizScan Ultra P still atop the Wizard X heavy launch vehicle, which still has a little bit of fuel left, and they are going to use that just to get a little bit closer to orbital velocity before we move on to the last stage of the booster here. And we have flameout of the main ascent stage of the Wizard X Heavy, and now the final stage kicks in, the orbital stage, which is designed to be most efficient in the vacuum of space. This, of course, not as efficient as the nuclear rockets on the main vehicle, but it is very, very large and has an awful lot of thrust, and it is hoped that this will be able to give the kick we need to carry our vehicles on to Duna. And the WizScan Ultra P has achieved orbit around the planet Kerbin. And we are now just waiting for the TV executive who did the correspondence course in orbital mechanics to work out exactly how he is going to arrange a rendezvous between the WizScan Ultra P and the WizStar 1. Whilst he does that, we will also ask the question, will they ever come up with a more imaginative naming scheme for their vehicles? Only time will tell. Plotted, the engines are fired in order to bring about the rendezvous of these two vehicles as they continue their ballistic trajectories around the planet Kerbin. Will our correspondence course TV executive have succeeded in plotting the maneuver? Separation 2.5 kilometers. Not bad, pig. Not bad. And let's just take a moment to observe the majesty of the city lights below as we approach orbital sunrise here, following the WizScan Ultra P as it approaches the rendezvous point. And the engines are firing now just to kill the relative velocity between these two space vehicles to bring them into the same orbit, or very nearly. Only 2.5 kilometers separating them now. Day 68. Jemby, Juggly, and Patlas are in the habitation module. Lena is in the command pod, looking over some details. The call comes in that an automated vehicle is on course to pass very near to the Wizard Star 1. Patlas is ordered to take control of the outpost and, if he can, to bring it close enough for an expedition to be mounted by the Kerbmates to retrieve the surprise packages loaded onto the automated vehicle. Excitement mounts as the Kerbmates prepare. Patlas Kerman transfers into the command pod, replacing Lena Kerman. And firing up the engines on the Wizard Star 1, he begins to approach cautiously, reaching about 10 meters per second, then using the reaction control system aboard the station to make sure that the velocity vector is aligned with the target. Approaching now at about 4.4 meters per second, the Kerbmates become excited as they begin to make out the details of the WizScan Ultra P. And one of them notices that the transponder is reading the WizScan Ultra P plus Luancha. Clearly one of the highly trained TV executives must have still been a little drunk when programming that into the module. Patlas Kerman expertly pilots the WizStar 1 into close formation with the automated vehicle. taking it in as close as possible and then arresting all motion relative, or at least as much relative motion as he is able to read on his relatively basic instrumentation. And now the Kerbmates agree to who is going to go outside. Lena Kerman steps out first, then realizes she's a scientist, and perhaps it would be better to call out an engineer. So Gemby Kerman steps out. She is indeed an engineer. Lena Kerman stays outside just in case she is needed to perform a rescue or anything of that nature as Gemby Kerman leaves the station. Kerbinaut is off structure. And as we are continuing to experiment with the schedule here on the channel, you can expect to see a lot more from the Duna 1 and a bit team, as we will be trying to get multiple episodes out a week, 2 or 3 at least. But fear not, if you're a fan of the other series here on the channel, I will be sticking to the schedule with those. There will be at least 1 City Skylines and 1 Medieval Engineers video a week, not to mention the regulars like Weird Wednesday and the Retro Friday series, at least until the Rune playthrough is complete. It's going to be a busy time ahead.